Maximize Business Value podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition their business on their terms. Our mission was born from the lessons we've learned from over 100 business transactions, which fuels our desire to share our experiences and wisdom so you can succeed. Now here's your host, CEO of Mastery Partners, Tom Bronson.
Hi, this is Tom Bronson, and welcome to Maximize Business Value, a podcast for business owners who are passionate about building long-term sustainable value in their businesses. This episode is part of a new series of podcasts called Tales from the 17% Club. As we've said over and over on this podcast, a full 83% of attempted business transitions failed to reach the finish line, meaning only 17% are successful. In this series, we'll be interviewing people who have successfully sold their businesses or transitioned them, as we call those folks, the 17% Club, to learn more about the process and hear some really interesting stories. So in this episode, I'd like to welcome our guest, David Wible. He's the founder and CEO of Work.software. I've known David for a few years, and I was trying to think back about when we actually first met, but I think it's when we shared a stage at either a Blue Star Symposium or some other event. And when we first met, David was the CEO of a business called Industry Weapon, a leading digital media company specializing in the advancement of digital signage for all industries. David and his team successfully exited that business in 2020, putting him firmly in the 17% Club. So welcome to Maximize Business Value, David.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tom. I appreciate it. And that was quite an intro.
Well, I hope some of it was actually true. Tell us about Industry Weapon, the business that you sold in 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. So started that company back in roughly 2006, and then got firmly in the digital signage market in 2007. And so what we really did is help the non-technical people, marketing, merchandising, communication folks, make sense of or be able to put their communication on video walls, kiosks, and digital signs. So we were a SaaS company before it was really cool to call it SaaS or cloud. It was still kind of referred to as ASP, but that's what we did. We sold primarily through the channel, which obviously that's how our paths cross, is with one of our great channel partners, and it was one heck of an interesting ride, to say the least.
I'll bet. Let's talk about that exit. You sold the business in 2020, right?
Yes.
Okay, so did you have an exit strategy before that time? Or, and if you did, what did that strategy look like? Or did a transaction just fall in your lap? That's happened before, right? So did you have an intentional strategy, or was it an accidental strategy?
No, it was intentional, and it was probably, for me, I made certain that we started to lay the groundwork very, very early. So my digital war room, with all the documents and everything that you can imagine, was created in year 2 of the company. And then I started having conversations with investment bankers, private equity, venture capital, about 5 years prior to the exit. So, really just trying to figure out, my real concern was I wanted to find the right buyer, and it's no different than when people buy products from you. People buy from people they like, and I wanted to make sure that when I handed the business over, that I liked the people that I would hand it over to, so that I gave my employees as best of a chance to continue on with their career as I could. And so we started really, really early with those conversations.
That's awesome. I'm really surprised that you started building that data room, if you will. You called it your war room, and I call it a data room, in year 2 of the business. That's really amazing. Now, had you done this before? Had you exited a business before, and so you knew to do that stuff?
Yeah, we, in we'd sold a heavy industrial manufacturing company before, and that didn't have a lot of war room needs. But in right around the 2000s, I was a part of a .com startup that ended up selling, and watching the process of assembling the war room documents, gave me a little pitter patter in my chest every time I thought about it. So I wanted to make certain that we could start that process early. And digital just made a heck of a lot more sense because I could get my arms around everything and actually see the topology of the folders I was creating. And then periodically I would pull some of my go-to consultants in to take a look at that structure, whether it be my attorney, my tax guys, just making sure that I was covering all the bases. Because I think that's the big mystery, right? What documents is a buyer going to ask for? And typically it's everything. So, we had to start that early.
Yeah, we're going to talk about due diligence and the things that they ask for in just a minute. So you started contacting investment bankers, private equity, venture capitalists, those folks about 5 years prior to the deal, I think. So at that time, did you have a timeline for when you wanted a transaction to happen?
No, but when we started into the digital signage market, we went out and raised a small round of angel financing, right in they call it the $1 million mark. And so I knew I owed it to those investors to get them some sort of return. And when I accepted their investment, it was always understood that this wasn't a lifestyle business for them, and they would expect us to exit. So we knew something had to happen at some point. And so again, for me, I just felt it really important to get to know people over time, and then not be in that situation where I felt like I was in crunch time. When I knew it was time to go, I wanted to be able to reach out to those handful of people that I'd met that I liked to begin the process.
Okay. All right. So you started talking to them around 5 years before. Did a timeline become clear to you as you started engaging in those conversations? Like, all right, this is it. We want to do it in 2020, and now here's what the time frame looks like, or did it just sort of evolve into that?
It evolved, but I can say that the conversations were really valuable in really just getting clear on what I wanted and what I should be expecting the process to look like. Everybody tells you, it can happen pretty quick. It could be 3 months. It could be 6 months. The reality, when I started getting around some people who knew that I wasn't getting ready to go anytime soon, I think the truth kind of flushed out, right? 9 to 12 is realistic, and it could go longer depending on how terrible the documents are, or how crazy the due diligence list looks. And so those conversations really, really helped. It also opened my eyes to the things that buyers truly cared about. And I talk a lot at Work.software about what I call VCR, or value creation revenue. That concept came from the conversations that I was having early on, where I started to realize not all revenue is valuable to a buyer, and I needed to really get my house in order and start putting the right building blocks in place that's going to maximize our exit.
I love that. That's a term that I'd never heard before. You and I started talking a few months back about the value creation with VCR, value creation revenue. Just give us a quick snapshot of what does that mean?
Well, I think, the first thing that any leader or someone who's getting ready to sell has to understand is, how are you going to be valued? Is it going to be a multiple of EBITDA? Is it going to be a multiple of top line? Once you get that, then you start looking at the revenue streams that are going to contribute to that valuation. For me, at Industry Weapon, we were primarily a software as a service business, which meant the only revenue that anyone cared about was our subscription revenue. And it had to be sticky, meaning there had to be customers who weren't leaving in a year. They had to stay with us, and the longer, the better. And so that was a real driver for me. If it's EBITDA for a different company, right, they're going to look for the things that are going to drive the most most cash to the bottom line, so they get that number up and where they want it. It also allow them to earmark certain expenses that they can say, hey, when I'm gone or when I sell, we're going to add back some of these expenses or bring this revenue back into the EBITDA number because I'm no longer going to be here. So it really helps you open your eyes from that perspective. And then for your team, when they understand what revenue streams really trip your trigger and why, the magic happens, right? If you have a technology team, they start building features that complement that revenue stream. If your sales guys are out selling, they know now what to focus on and why it makes sense.
Yeah, for us, it was the same thing. Recurring revenue. My last company, we started around the same time that you did. No one even knew what SaaS was in 2004 and 5. And we were out building a recurring revenue business because we knew that added value. I wish I'd thought of that term, value creation, revenue. But that's really what it was for us, that recurring revenue, because it made our business more valuable. Now you talk about, you surrounded yourself with the right people, I think, and that's having what I call a transition team. Tell us about who were the advisors? What were the roles, not their names, but what were the roles that those advisors played for you in your transition planning?
Yeah. So, a couple of things. You're talking right at the exit, correct? Or right around the time we were thinking about it?
The actual group that's helping you through the process of the exit, right?
Yeah. So, interestingly enough, I went to my board and said, hey, I want to run this process myself. I don't want a banker. And for me, that was the right decision. A little bit of a micromanaging freak, right? So I really, really wanted to own the process. And I had a great team at Industry Weapon to run the day-to-day. So I could afford, if I needed to back off the business without it taking a nosedive, because I had great partners and a great team in place. But once we got to, once we got down to about 3 LOIs that I was serious about, my team really consisted of my attorney, who had a lot of M&A experience, and I'd been with him since the beginning, so he really understood the business. I brought in, I separated my finances in 2 ways. So I had a team that did audits, and then I had a separate company that did all of our taxes, right? And so they were a nice complement and kind of helped each other out. And it was a nice check and balance for me. Both of those folks were at the table with me. So my structure is fairly lean on the finance side. I have a phenomenal, actually brought her over to my new business, controller, but she wasn't a CFO. And so that's what those 2 parties really helped me do. I had a team that made up my CFO, which also led me to some really, really great discoveries before I sold, which is making sure that all of our documentation as it related to our finances were directly relatable to GAAP principles. And we created revenue recognition policies and all the appropriate policies. So when due diligence happened, we had the document to kind of get those folks up and running without asking all the questions that would come if they didn't know we had a policy. And so those are my 3 keys. Again, I had 2 partners that were active in the business that I could lean on. And then I had a wonderful board that would have done anything for us. But that was it. We kept it lean and we kept it out of any other employees' purview. So no one knew anything was going on.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Running a process on your own is certainly an option. Since you'd been through a process before, you really sort of understood that. It can save a little bit of money. For most businesses, it's probably better to have professionals running that for you, but you kind of fit into that ideal kind of tweener zone, I would call it, where you had the bandwidth to do it yourself, and you had the infrastructure to put together the data and manage the process. Not a lot of companies have that all together. And so, but the only reason you did, if I'm hearing correctly, is because of your advanced planning and thinking it through and doing that. And so that's certainly a way to save a little bit of money on the back end rather than paying somebody else to do those things. so long as you have the bandwidth to do it. So I applaud you for doing that. I've done the same thing in my businesses, but I've also in other businesses used professionals to help facilitate a deal in that. So let's talk about once you made the decision and you go out and you find the three companies and you've got a LOI from each one of them. Well, now it's time to get into kind of that dreaded due diligence. How did you narrow it from 3 to 1, or did you play all three of them throughout the process?
Yeah, well, I should first tell you the LOI process, it got narrowed down to 3. It was a ton of companies. And so very similar to the deal room that was built, or I should say the war room that was built with all my documents, I had a similar interface. I used dealroom.net to do all of this. I used a subset of that deal room technology to get everybody who was thinking about this transaction in my system. The great thing about it was I could see who was opening my documents. I could see what documents they were opening. I could see how long they were looking at it, which really helped me understand who was serious and who was just kicking tires, right? And so that was really important. But once we got it down to 3, I was actively having conversations with all of them up until the signature, right? Because I had some great advice from my advisors and some of my mentors on the control is all yours until you sign that LOI. So whatever you do, maximize that as best you can. And so once we got down to 3, it was a good probably 4 weeks of back and forth and really negotiating. It's really, really important to have more than one because you can really get some wonderful things thrown in there. I should also say, I think it's really important, and not to get into the nitty gritty of our deal, but to understand that there's really 2 numbers that you really want to look at when you're doing a transaction. And the second one's probably more important than the first. Everybody says, what did you sell the business for, right? How much did they pay? And that's an important number. I think, just it's kind of nice to play business and know what your goals are and how to keep score. But the real fillet of the deal is below that number, right? Were you able to keep your cash? What other things can you actually negotiate into the deal that, if you know what the buyer is buying and why they're buying, it really helps you structure a deal so they can win and you can maximize the take home, right? And so, again, the first number is for your ego, the second number is for your pocketbook.
Right, exactly. So, well, it helps to have advanced tax planning as well, especially in today's day and age. So did you actually sign 3 different letters or only one of those 3 letters?
No, once we decided to get married, that was the time to let the other 2 know that, thanks, but I'm going a different route. And they were all awesome. Every one of them had a VC attached to them. So very, very professional. Nobody got too ruffled over not being chosen, but everybody appreciates transparency. I mean, I didn't share names, but they all knew that I was looking at other folks.
Right. So it sounds like you were doing some of the due diligence even before you got to LOI, right? You were allowing them, opening the kimono to a lot of them and allowing them to go deep before you had an LOI.
Yeah, and I wanted to establish very, very quickly with any of those people that I had the first initial conversation, or let's say the fit conversation, right? How I was going to value the business. And I think sometimes people are afraid to do that. They don't want to throw a number out first. But I wanted to make sure that the people that I was talking to understood that I was going to do the deal at this, this range in a multiple, and I was kind of getting rid of and thinning out the herd very quickly. So for me, we were a multiple of top line. We were not a multiple of EBITDA. And so the first question out of my mouth is, hey, Tom, how do you value businesses? Is it a multiple of EBITDA or a multiple of top line? any of the ones that got, wishy-washy or were a little vague about it, I threw them out, because no point in playing with people like that. The serious buyers know what you're looking for and will tell you immediately how they value businesses. It may not perfectly line up, but at least you got a straight shooter.
Right. And it's important to call the hurt, right? Because in any transaction, there are literally dozens and dozens of potential suitors, and you just don't have the bandwidth to deal with all of them long term. So I'm a big fan of that kind of. I call that anchoring, right? Anchoring the deal. Here's the way we think it should be traded. If you don't value businesses that way, no harm, no foul. Thanks for your time. Moving on. Taking away your access to my data room, right? And
exactly.
I think that's a smart play. In fact, I'm trying to remember the book written by the Blackstone Group. I think maybe it's not Blackstone. It's Never Split the Difference is the name of the book, but it's when you're in negotiating, it's be the anchor. You want to be the anchor, because then you can weigh the conversation based on that. If you let the other person be the anchor, then you're trying to pull them up to yours. Well, now they're trying to pull you down if you're out of their range. I like that philosophy, but it's not for the faint of heart.
No, I mean it's just like any sales funnel, right? You don't. It hurts to see them go, but at the same time, they were never going to be there in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. So now, after you signed the LOI, was there more due diligence with the actual buyer?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
All right. Now, just so you know, I did a podcast and I think a blog post. I called it the dreaded due diligence. I'll have to look up what number it is. I'll post it on the website again. But so it sounds like you may have had a similar experience that I've had 100 times. So how did that final round of due diligence go?
Well, I got to say the buyer was extremely thorough, and I really appreciated that, because again, I wanted to make sure we had a good home for our folks, or at least do as much as I possibly could. But it's amazing. They don't come all at once, right? It doesn't come in a pretty package and you open it up and it's either in a PDF, an Excel sheet, or whatever. It comes in all flavors. And for us, there were several audit teams that they sent in. So everything from the finances to the sales to security to you name it, right? So in the end, all in all, it was 678 requests. And the power of I can't stress enough having your own war room, like a deal room or something like that, because a lot of times the requests are coming in as this for the same document. But for me, I wanted to be the glorified waiter for everybody. And I always, back in my manufacturing days, I was always taught when we had a union negotiation, you never give your own verbiage for things in the contract. You always pull from the union's library. That way you don't have to worry about negotiation over just stupid terms. And so same thing here. I wanted to make sure that even though someone else made the same request, I wasn't going to shame that person. I was going to make certain that we linked that request to a document, and they collected it the way they wanted to collect it. And it was really, really important, I think, to make them win and help them do as little work as they possibly needed to do. And I don't think it slowed down on the request by any stretch of the imagination, but it definitely kept me in the right mindset of knowing this thing is going to end at some point. It's just going to be a lot bigger and longer than I am expecting.
Right. Well, that's brilliant. A lot of people don't think about that and how to make the job easy. I always say that the faster and easier you can make due diligence for the buyer, the more likely a deal will happen. And tends to kill deals, but it's for a lot of other reasons. Now, I'm running the risk here with having you on this podcast in the 17% club, because I'm about to ask you something that I don't think anybody else in the club kind of has achieved. Very few times do I hear this. Toward the end of the due diligence, you get what I lovingly call the retrade conversation. These are the things that we discovered, and it's caused us to reprice the deal. So did you get that retrade conversation? And if so, what was the result? Did it go up or down?
Yeah. So, for us, luckily it went up. And a lot of that was because of the bottom part of that number that I talked about, the importance of serving your pocketbook over the ego and the top line number. I think also what helped or really gave us an opportunity to have that better conversation was the fit conversations up front with the buyers. And so making sure we set expectation, but we didn't overreach when it came to what we were saying we had or what we were representing, because it's going to come out in the due diligence. Luckily for us, we downplayed a lot of things. So when we started going through the due diligence, they were surprised. Like, even the way we counted customers, we clustered certain customers together where they saw very quickly they could ungroup them, and all of a sudden it looked like they created more customers than what we even had. And so making sure that any surprise was a delight and not aha, like what I found, because I think that's, you can get caught up in that, right? So especially if you don't have a clear vision on what the exit number is going to be, you're going to oversell it, and that's when you're going to get the haircut.
Yeah, like I said, I hesitate because your number actually went up as a result of your final retrade. But you hit the nail on the head. The trick is to disclose everything. I mean, every business has ports. But if you disclose those in advance, and the information that they get during due diligence actually is better than the picture you painted for them, then in the end, you can be a winner, right, on that game. But if I hear so many times, well, how do we spin this, or how do we hide this? Don't hide it. Somebody who's skilled at due diligence, especially if you've got a strategic or a financial buyer, they're going to find everything. And if you disclose it in advance, you have a better chance of holding off on that retrade conversation. And I've got stories about that myself, that perhaps someone's going to interview me on this podcast about one of my transactions, and I'll tell about that story then. But before we jump into the break, real quick, when did your employees find out, and how did they react?
They found out. Well, I had to bring in a couple of people just to right the ship on a couple of things, right? So about 3 weeks before the actual date of handing over the keys, I brought my controller in just because there were some just transactional processes that I really wanted her to be a part of, and one of our architects on the technology side we brought in. And then we told the entire team the day that we were turning it all over. And I think everybody knew. I mean, I was doing that for about 14 years, so they probably knew the day was going to come at some point. And but they were a little shocked, to say the least. But the other thing is, the thing they care about the most is making sure that their career is going forward. They really don't, I wouldn't say they don't care, but they really don't care that you're going to, move on and go do something. And really at that point, it's not about, boy, I wonder how well, these guys actually are. That doesn't cross their mind. So
how does it impact me? How does it impact me?
Yeah. And that was it. So very few, I had very few conversations about what am I going to do, and more about what are they going to do. And that's what I expected.
All right, we're going to take a break. We're talking with David Wible, a member of the 17% Club. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be back in 30 seconds.
Don't you want to be a 17%er too? Of course you do, and we can help you get there. This fall, Mastery Partners is on a mission to unmask the value of your business with our incredible tool, the Transition Readiness Assessment, or as we like to call it, the TRA. In a simple and complicated way, The TRA unmasks where you are generating value in your business and where you aren't. This comprehensive assessment pinpoints your hits and misses so you can focus on what's working and solve what's not. What you do today matters and will have a tremendous impact on the future value of your business. Get your TRA today and be a 17%er. Go to masterypartners.com, schedule a call with Tom, and join our TRA challenge. Don't be deceived. Uncover and know how to build massive value in your business.
We're back with David Wible, a business owner who has successfully transitioned his business in 2020. So what did you learn going through the process that you didn't know before, David?
Man, there were a lot of funny moments.
Mind you, we have a time limit. So
well, it's funny. It's not some of probably the big aha things that, some people talk about. For me, it was the little mechanics that were really, really interesting. So for instance, at the end of the due diligence process, you're coming down to figuring out what all the numbers are. And again, the number below the big number is really where the important parts are, but you're running a business and it's operating. So how do you know what the final numbers are, right? And so I am freaking out as we're coming to the end of the days. And mind you, I'm the guy on the company side. How am I going to get all these numbers to line up perfectly? And I'm completely losing my mind until my attorney finally says to me, I don't understand what you're losing your mind over. There's a 90-day grace period here where we're actually going to true the numbers up, and that'll all flush itself out. So that was a really nice thing that someone could have told me up front. And then the other thing was in our deal, we needed to set up an entity to be able to transfer the money and then disperse it to our shareholders. Well, no one told me that, right? And so as we're coming down to the end, my attorney says to me, "Hey, what's the EIN number for the entity that you formed?" And I'm like, "What entity?" Right? So those were some of the goofy things that I was like, boy, that would be nice if someone had a punch list for the owners to be able to say, hey, by the way, in the next whatever few months, just form an entity so we can do all of this stuff, right? And then making sure you find a bank that can actually wire out to your shareholders. Just those things were a big aha. I think the other thing was, a lot of times when you're getting ready to sell your business, I think there's some folks out there that like to kind of preach the fear of, how are you going to create a SIM and tell the right story, and what does the documents look like that you need to share? And the reality of it is, it doesn't have to be as laborious and a huge document that everybody said it needed to be. I found that something a little bigger than an executive summary is what wet the beak of the serious buyers. And then we start going through, what I would say that pre-LOI process of getting them what they uniquely wanted to see in order to see if it was going to fit with what they wanted to buy. So this whole idea of going through an exercise of creating a massive book was another thing that I realized was a farce, at least for our business.
Right. Yeah, it's not required for many businesses. By the way, SIM, as he said, CIM, that's confidential information memorandum, common term for business transactions. So was there anything in hindsight that you would have done differently?
Anything I would have done differently? No, I was pretty happy with the way we executed things. I really liked the way everything went down. I don't know, because probably any of my complaints was how many more requests am I going to get, and we were as clear as we possibly could be. But certain people needed to be done certain ways. But I would say, looking back, and now I know because of working in my new venture, building a better career trajectory methodology for each and every employee would be something that I wish I would have done better, because I think I created more stress for those folks during the transition, and some people I think got overlooked with some of the superpowers that I know they had, because we didn't do a good enough job documenting the special nature of our team. And so that without a doubt is something I would have changed. We had just started to deploy this action-based framework that we now have at Work.software. But yeah, that's probably my biggest regret. I could have done a hell of a lot better job at helping people build their live portfolio or their live resume.
Right. I like that. That's thinking about the people, right? And helping the folks down the line, because this is an important transition for them as well. Is there any advice that you would give to business owners who are just beginning to think about a transition for their business?
Yeah, I absolutely. So the first thing I would say is start having conversations now, right? It is never too early to begin a process of dating these people, because at the end of the day, you're not going to know who they are, and you probably will never really completely know, but you'll know a lot better if you start your process now and just start having conversations. And it's interesting to see how those innocent collisions start to lead you to the obvious buyers. And I think we all hear, oh, you probably already know who the buyer is going to be. It's, it's probably a strategic, and it's this, that, and the other. But I met a lot of amazing people along the way that introduced me to some really great people that eventually was the acquirer for our business. I met them through a collision that I'd made early on 5 years ago. The person I was introduced to, we ended up putting a deal together, right? And the nice thing is, you also don't come across desperate, and you can get a good sense of what the buyer is going to want to see. And so if you start early, you can start putting all of those building blocks in place now, give them time to mature and settle into your organization. So when the due diligence process happens, it's like, voila, oh, that's how we do business. Well, I got to cheat, which was awesome. I got to get the playbook a half a decade ahead of when I was going to exit.
No, that's brilliant. Start early. I love that advice. I often say it's never too early. It's never too early. I have never gotten into a business, and some businesses I've held for as long as 17 years. I've never gotten into a business without first understanding what my exit strategy is. Didn't mean that didn't ebb and flow, because it changed with what was going on in the marketplace, right? I might have been pursuing a revenue deal, but then the revenue multiples changed, and then I needed to pivot and go to an EBITDA deal. But if you know that stuff, it helps drive the decisions in the business. Now, when it came down to time to transition the business, did you have an idea of what you were going to do next already?
Yeah, without a doubt. 100%. The reason also that I wanted to get out of the business, it was in January of 2020, and I'll never forget it. I think everybody needs to understand what their values are. And when I say that, I don't mean the typical values like, be a good father, be a good husband, be this, that, and the other thing. I'm talking about what is it that really drives you in business. And for me, it was three simple things, right? I like my businesses to require me to be resilient. I require them to challenge me, and I want them to be fun. And without a doubt, when January rolled around, I had two of the three, and it was the fun one that fell off. And I'll never forget going to our board and just saying, I'm done. Like, we had already hit all the magic numbers. We were doing dividends, so everybody was happy, and no one was pressuring anybody to go. But it lost its fun. And so during that process of selling the business, I got to dig deep and figure out what really kind of charged me up about business. And that's what helped lead me to the next thing I wanted to get started. So I had
That
a
is a
pretty good leg
perfect
up.
segue. Tell me what you're doing now and how our folks might benefit from your new company.
Yeah, so it happened, like I said, through that process. A lot of the folks that I was interacting with and showing what we were doing and having really cool conversations, I started to explain to them this thing I called the action-based framework. I always say you need to know your superpowers. Mine happen to be thinking, drawing, and talking, and so I like to draw some things out. And the action-based framework was something that I really, really fundamentally believed in. I didn't have a name for it, while I was running Industry Weapon. And I realized it is what helped me stay ahead of the financials. It gave me the ability to make changes in my business before the next P&L came out. And we were cash flow positive, profitable, and debt-free very early because of it. And so I wanted to build a platform that gave other business leaders the ability to leverage it in their businesses. And I always say the nice thing about Work.software is we help people, take the vision that got them where they are now and help them be able to scale it beyond where they can even, think is possible by, at the end of the day, empowering the people, right? And so, like I said, one of my biggest regrets is doing more for the employees so they were better prepared. Work.software leverages action-based frameworks to be able to help take the vision of the business and distill it down to each individual career of every employee. And so that's what we do. We help companies grow faster utilizing a platform.
I love it, and I love the software. For our listeners to the podcast, if you don't know this, we've got a YouTube channel. It's called the Maximize Business Value YouTube channel. I had David and his partner Will on a webinar a couple of weeks ago that is on our YouTube channel about Work.software that goes into a much deeper dive onto that software. I highly, highly recommend that for any business owner that really wants to drive sustainable results and accountability in their business. And that's really kind of what we're all about. Well, before we run out of time, I wanted to ask you one last business question because this podcast is called Maximize Business Value. What's the one most important thing you recommend business owners do to build value in their business?
I think the biggest thing is the quicker they can get to understanding what their value creation revenue is, the faster they're going to be able to create clarity in their business and simplicity. And when I say simplicity, I don't mean dumbing stuff down. I believe simplicity is a very simple equation. It's frequency plus clarity, right? So once you understand what it is that is going to drive the value of your business, you need to constantly communicate that out to your team, and you need them to give you feedback on what they didn't understand about what you just said, right? Because kind of like what you were talking about, what you did for us on this podcast was, hey, some of you may not know what SIM is, right? And so here, let me give you the definition. That happens every day in every conversation that business leaders have with their employees. So you got to increase the frequency of conversations that you're having and your managers are having. And you constantly need to make sure that you're creating clarity and getting them, I call it an intensity score, right? So we want employees to constantly be asking the questions to show that they're active in the business and to communicate where we're not making sense and say it a different way or work with them until they get it.
I think that's great. I was going to be really, really disappointed in you if you didn't bring up VCR.
You know what? I actually, for us at Industry Weapon, when we learned about our VCR, it gave us the ability also to look at certain revenue streams and change their use, right? And align them more with the things that drove value. And what was awesome about it is I could create more value for our customers with less cost by doing some of these exercises. So I think there's hidden gems for everybody once they understand what is the main driver of their business.
That's awesome. In fact, I think we ought to follow up with maybe a blog post about what VCR is and what that means. Maybe I'll get you to write that blog post for us, or we'll have you on another podcast just to talk about VCR. Now, as is the habit, I don't know if you listen, but our listeners always like it when we get to this question, and that I ask a bonus question at the end. And so I have to ask you, even though we're kind of doing a different series here, because longtime listeners would be disappointed if I didn't ask this question. What personality trait has gotten you into the most trouble through the years? I bet I haven't. I bet I can answer this one for you, but I'd love to hear your answer.
Yeah, I take everything so personal. I am 100% a complete drama queen over stuff. At times I just have a really bad attitude. Like one of the things I know I love about business is really hating my competitors and wanting to like smash them into the dirt. And so that has gotten me in more trouble than I care to admit.
Because I know a lot about you, and I wouldn't think that about you. I've always, followed the philosophy: keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
I wish
my enemies, right?
I wish I had that ability. I just don't but it's part of the fun. It's part of the, again, like I say at Work.software all the time now about, knowing how to keep score in business, know what the goals are, right? And business is a sport, right? And so your competitors are on the other side of the line. And, last I checked, when game's on, we're not friends. I'm here to, I want to win. And so, that's gotten me in some trouble.
That's awesome. I love that answer. So that's a unique one. I don't think I've heard that one before. How can our viewers get in touch with you and with Work.software?
Yeah. So Work.software is, amazingly to me, especially in 2021, we actually have the URL www.work.software, not .com. It's .software. I can be found at david@work.software is my email. And, you can, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm all over the place. I'm connected to you. So
yeah, awesome.
I'm sure if they can't get me, they can get you, and we'll connect.
Well, this has been a great, fun conversation. Thanks for coming on the podcast, David.
Hey, thank you, Tom.
So you can find David Wible at Work.software or on LinkedIn. And of course, as always, you can reach out to me and I will be happy to make a warm introduction to my good friend, David Wible. You really should check out that new company, Work.software. I think it could be a game changer for you and your business. This is the Maximize Business Value podcast, where we give practical advice to business owners who are passionate about building long-term sustainable value in their business. Be sure to tune in each week because this series is going to be a lot of fun. The 17%er Club, Tales from the 17% Club. And follow us wherever you found the podcast. Be sure to comment. We love your comments. Until next time, I'm Tom Bronson, reminding you that it's never too early to start planning your ideal desired exit strategy while you maximize business value.
Thank you for tuning in to the Maximize Business Value podcast with Tom Bronson. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition on their terms. Learn more on how to build long-term sustainable business value and get free value-building tools by visiting our website, www.masterypartners.com. That's master with a Y, masterypartners.com. Check it out.
That was perfect. I wouldn't make any changes on that.